all around product development and product protection, and how to design and create the best products and make sure they're protected when you launch into the marketplace. We've got a fantastic array of speakers with us today from various companies, and I'll run through that in a minute. So I'll share my screen so we can get cracking in due course. There we go. Right, before we go, just a bit of housekeeping. Joe has asked the non-speakers to switch their cameras off and mute their microphones, which is brilliant. I think Catherine Hayes, if you could, sounds like they can remember in lockdown. Catherine Hayes, you are not allowed to do that, when it was the parish council meeting in Cheshire somewhere. So yeah, if we can turn our cameras off, that would be fantastic, please. So the presenters, you can see them, they're all they've been on the screen previously. They're going to turn their cameras off if they're not talking. They are available throughout the 2 or 3 hour workshop to get involved if you've got questions. Everybody, if you do have questions, please put those into the chat on Teams. I'll keep an eye on that as I introduce the speakers and we run through those presentations. And if pertinent questions come up, I can then just butt in and make sure that they're sort of addressed as we go along. So please keep your microphones muted for the duration of the workshop. We do have a chat feature, so I say please use that. And if you've really got a question that you want to ask out loud, then yeah, pop your hand up and I'll keep an eye out for that as well. Currently scheduled to have 2 10-minute comfort breaks through the afternoon. Depending on time, we might just go for one. I'll play that a little bit by ear, so I hope everybody's okay with that. So, the Innovation Challenge, this is our 3rd year of running it. We're absolutely delighted that this is our 3rd year. It's bigger and better than before. We've got more companies involved on supporting us on our journey here. Here's just a few of them. These are people who have helped us take part in the product in the project, but also take part in the delivery of the workshops, and also very kindly donate time and effort to the prize fund, which I'll come on to in a moment. So a big thank you to all those. Our headline sponsor for the entire series of workshops and the Innovation Challenge is Shakespeare Martineau, and we've got Ed Wright coming on to the workshop a bit later on to talk about the legals of licensing in and out technology and products. So welcome to Ed, and a big thank you to Shakespeare's. And then today's workshop sponsor is Foresters, who we've worked with for quite a number of years now. And we've got Greg and Jag talking about different types of IP protection. So a big thank you to Foresters as well for sponsoring this workshop. Welcome, everybody. It's going to be a fun-packed afternoon. I'm Sam Stevens. I'm your host for the afternoon. I say any questions, please pop them in the chat. If you want to converse with us, then pop your hand up. We'll try and get you involved that way. It's going to be quite two-way with the presenters, but lots and lots of information coming over your way. Just a little bit about the Innovation Challenge. I say it's our 3rd year, and each year we run 4 workshops. So we've got money, we've got people, product and IP protection, and then how do we make money of it? And that 4th workshop is coming up on the 26th of June. If you're not registered, please do get registered. You can go to tbat.co.uk and then just follow the things through to the Innovation Challenge and book on the workshops. Again, this one is going to be fantastic, and that next one, all about making money, equally as important. So please book some time in to come along to that. However, at the end of that workshop number 4, we then open the Innovation Challenge itself, which is a business competition, and that is open to entrants until the 18th of August. So there's like a 2-month, 8-week window there for you to get applications in. So for the Innovation Challenge, it is UK startups that we're looking at, kind of up to 3 years in age, because we recognise that innovation and R&D doesn't happen overnight. So kind of up to 3 years. If you're outside of that, please get in touch, because there might be mitigating reasons why you're a great company and you should take part. So don't write yourself out. If you're just outside the criteria, please get in touch. It's all about people with aspiring ideas and aspiring entrepreneurs who want to get products and process or services to market that are innovative, maybe technically challenging, and are going to really turn what their industry does, maybe a little bit upside down, but really make a show. And in the final showcase last year, we had some fantastic presentations from the the top 10 of the people who applied into it. Big showcase. You get to do a presentation live in front of 100, 120 business professionals and investors. And then we do 2 runners-up and a winner. It is a fantastic opportunity to showcase what it is that you're looking to develop, or if you've already launched it to market. So please do look at that, and please do enter. Okay, the prize fund, you can see that on that list, we've got a fantastic array of the people who have sponsored different areas of the workshops, taken part in the workshops, but are also committing to the prize fund. So typically 4 or 5 days of effort to help you in specific areas. That might be IP protection, legal, CE marking, design, PR, marketing, UX, UI, web stuff. It's a fantastic opportunity to get hold of that professional device as part of the prize fund. There's a £5,000 cash prize, and for med tech innovators, there's an opportunity to go to CPHI in Milan, where there's 40,000 people go to that, and they have a startup section where there's 40 booths, and they sponsored 1 booth for the medtech winner that we identify out the competition, and that includes flights and accommodation. So that is a fantastic prize if you're in that medical field. The final workshop, as I say, is 26th of June, so please get yourselves booked onto that. And you can pre-register to take part in the Innovation Challenge. There's a QR code there. You can go to the TBAT website. As soon as it opens, you'll get notification. It's going to be a really simple process, maybe half a dozen questions, and upload a couple of documents that hopefully you've got to hand. Okay, so moving on to the workshop proper. Why run a product development and protection workshop? I think on the whole, it's quite obvious, because often people do product push into the marketplace, not really understanding what the customer wants. So we want to make sure is that you actually get that voice of the customer to help you develop the right product or service that the market wants. So there's a bit of that, but also if you do launch to market, how do you stop somebody from copying it immediately, taking over what you've got? So we've got quite a lot about licensing IP and IP protection. And then of course, if you get it into the marketplace, what CE marking or medical regulations does it need to conform to? So we've got some talks on that. This is going to be fantastic. But of course, you might know some bits, but as my good friend Donald Rumsfeld says, there are things you know, so that's really good. And there are things you don't know, but because you don't know about them, you can actually go out and find out about them, which is good as well. But in business, and specifically these areas, there are things you don't know, and that's where we want to educate you and bring you up to speed on some of the wider area around this topic that we're talking about. So there's going to be some absolute golden nuggets coming out, so please pay attention. It's going to be a bit of a roller coaster. These are our speakers for the afternoon. An amazing array of gorgeous looking people, and I thank them very much for giving up their time to be with us this afternoon. Some really talented individuals and some great subjects we're going to cover. So our first speaker is going to be Andy Lass from Oxford Product Design. So I think this is Andy's 3rd year of taking part in the challenge. So welcome, Andy.
Cool. Thanks, Sam. I will share my screen and get that up. Great. Hopefully everyone can see that.
Yeah, perfect.
Cool. So just to introduce a little bit about myself, I work for Oxford Product Design. I'm the lead industrial designer here. Personally, I have about 20 years industrial design experience, and I've always been a design consultant. So that experience has been spread across a range of companies, client companies I've worked for across all industry sectors. So a little bit about OPD. So we started in 2013, and at the moment we're about 30 staff and expanding. We're based just outside of Oxfordshire in Harwell. And we basically have everything on site. So prototyping facilities here, mechanical engineering teams, industrial design teams, human factors. We can basically a full service product design consultancy. We're independently audited to ISO 9001 and for 13485 for medical product design as well. And ultimately, we love what we do. We're all super passionate about design, and yeah, we like to make successful kind of commercial products. Some of our clients we've worked for, and this is just a small little cross-section, as I say, across all sectors and industries, medical, industrial, consumer electronics, that kind of thing. So a few things we're going to talk about today. So number one, what is product design? And then understanding your needs, and then how to engage with designers. That's always something that I think sometimes companies potentially struggle with if they haven't used design agencies before. So what is product design? So here's an image of three very different kind of products, really, three different devices. It's very easy to look at this and just say, oh, there's a drill, there's a flask, and there's a toothbrush. So really, how we like to define product design is when you buy a drill, are you actually buying the drill, or are you buying the ability to drill holes? Really, what you want is the hole at the end of the day. The drill is just a means to an end. With the flask, really, you want a hot drink when you're out on the go, and the flask just enables that. And you want good oral hygiene, and that's what you use the toothbrush for. So the way we like to define product design is the creative process of developing solutions to specific user needs. Particular focus on the word user there, and we're going to go into that in a bit more sort of detail soon. But it is a creative process. Design, there's a bit of an art to it. You develop that over experience, but there's lots you can do to lay the groundwork at the early stages of a design program to help make it more successful. So what is the actual design process? This is kind of a classic double diamond that you may have seen before. So starting on the left, really the key to any kind of design, successful design, is to start with a problem and really understand your problem. So then from there, we move into what we call the discover phase. And this is very much about laying the groundwork, laying the foundations for your design, doing your research, doing your homework, understanding the problem from every possible aspect, every possible way, and then kind of empathizing with the user there. And then define is about really defining what the problem is and what it is you want to achieve. Having that clear goal is absolutely essential to have a successful product. Doing the right things early makes the second part of the process, the second half, so much easier and therefore more efficient and cost effective. Once you've really defined the product and you've done some initial ideation and you're thinking about how you might solve the problems and solve your user needs, you can then move into the develop phase. And this is really where the kind of the nitty-gritty of the product design starts. This could be building prototypes, testing it with the user, getting that user feedback. And then when you've got basically a design, a device that you're happy with, you then move into what we call the deliver phase. And this is about manufacturing it, implementing the design, getting it out there, but also validating and verifying that it does what you say it's going to do and that it does what the user actually needs it to do. And then coming out at the end of that is then the final solution, and then that's commercially successful, hopefully, and that's your product in the market.
Okay, Andy, with it, so this is when you go for equity funding, they always say, fantastic, you've got a business idea, let's go forward, but what's the problem? And seeing, as you say, you need to clearly enunciate the problem to start working towards a solution, because otherwise you might be developing something nobody wants, kind of thing.
Absolutely. So, see that where people will develop technology, but maybe haven't quite defined what the problem that technology is trying to solve actually is.
Yeah. So really, and do you sometimes get the thing that they've got a problem, we start on this journey, but then the solution is valid, but it's actually solving a different problem? Because as you've gone through that learning process.
Yeah, you can get that. It's worth pointing out that this is not necessarily a linear process. There are cyclical elements to it, and you may uncover new needs and challenge your assumptions anyway, and then find new uses for your tech or your product. And that does happen as well. So it's really about just kind of understanding the needs to begin with, and so much from that. And so how do you create a desirable product that people will want to use? Broadly, there's three elements that make this up. So you've got the feasibility, which is the technology. So ensuring that the technology is right, the product works, it's feasible to achieve and do what it is you want to do. Viability comes in really from the business model. How are you going to get your product out there? What's your route to market? How ready are you to put this product out there? And then the desirability is considering the usability, making sure that it's ergonomic to use, whatever the device is, it's easy to understand, it's intuitive. And then in the overlaps from here, you cross over into your brand, making sure that you have a brand that instills confidence in the user, making sure the mechanical engineering is right in the functional design. And then overarching all of this is the need for sustainability. So minimizing the impact of your product on the environment, or at least understanding the impact so you can mitigate risks as you go. And all of that considered together, somewhere in the middle, is hopefully your successful commercial viable product that people want to buy. And so if I move on now to the second section, so this is about understanding your needs. So Charles Kettering, famous American inventor, had something like 180 patents to his name, I believe. I really like this quote: "A problem well stated is a problem half solved." And I think that harks back to what we were just saying about really laying the groundwork, doing the research, and understanding what it is you're trying to do is half of the problem. So keeping the user at the center and having a user-centric approach is really key. So what are the benefits of that? So how we like to work here is find stakeholder insight, gather stakeholder insights early on. So speak to your users, whoever they may be. If it's a medical product, speak to the people that will be using it. Speak to potential patients. If it's a consumer product, again, potentially do focus groups. Find the people that will be using these products, and then learn to empathize with them. That empathy really helps you in the creative process for understanding what somebody may want out of their product or service. But also it allows you to verify your assumptions. It's very easy to say, we think this, but then if you haven't done the research to really prove that, then how do you know you're right? And you may well be right. Your assumptions for what a user needs may well be right, but it's about verifying that and making sure. And then defining the needs early means that the designers have the full picture to begin with. And then that allows us to identify the opportunities for innovation. And from that is really the key. That's where good design comes from. It's understanding what we can do to innovate and give you a USP on your product.
Yeah. And even at this stage, Andy, are you looking at that feasibility, the viability, and the desirability aspects?
100%. Right from the start. It's absolutely key. It's all got to kind of work. It's a very complex process. So really, these are some questions that it's always good to kind of ask yourself when you're developing a product. So very high level, quite simple, but I always find it refreshing to kind of sometimes just take a step back and answer these questions. So number one, why? Why is your product or service needed? Why is it useful? What do your users want from it? And what is its USP, its unique selling point? And then when is it used? For instance, is it a device which is used in an emergency? That will have a massive impact on the user's state of mind when using it. So that will impact the way you design the user interface on the product, or making it as intuitive as possible. So all of these questions have much broader ranging impact on the outcome of the design. So when is the device needed? When's it not needed? What do you do with it when it's not needed? Where is it used? Is it used in a doctor's surgery, or is it used in a warehouse? All of these things have to be considered right at the start. And actually, a really good one that a lot of people forget about is, where is it sold and where is it advertised? Personally, I've designed a lot of office products, and these products are sold on a tiny little picture in a catalogue. And so unless your device stands out on a tiny little thumbnail image, it's easy to get lost in a sea of competition. So all of these questions are really vital.
Yeah.
And then moving on from that, it's understanding your consumer. So again, which questions? So who is the user? Who is the product aimed at? Something that's aimed at an 80-year-old would be very different to something which is aimed at a 20-year-old. That may sound very obvious, but a lot of products can have an age range of scope of that kind of magnitude. And so it impacts the design. How do you design something that works across all age ranges, say? Why do the users want it, and why would they choose this over a competitor? So, do you have a particular brand element or a USP? Is your product going to be more rugged and reliable than a competitor's, say? Or is it going to be made from sustainable materials? What is the innovation? What is the need being met? And then how does this make the user feel, and how does it needs? People's emotional responses to a product is also really key to their success. I sort of really believe people bond with products, and you learn to use a product. And I've had examples where people will use a product because it's all they have, but it might not be the best or a very good design. So people learn to overcome its inefficiencies. But wouldn't it be better if they didn't have to make those compromises? And so really coming from that is the need for a specification. If you're going to work with designers, or even if you're going to kind of do the design yourself, having a clear specification which spells out what it is you're trying to achieve is really critical. So why have a spec? So it provides you with those prioritized goals, and it allows you to focus on what's important. If there's something you're doing to a design, but you can't sort of pull it back to the spec and say this is achieving this point, then why are you doing it? And it also provides the metrics for success. You can look back at the spec throughout the process and be, yes, we're doing these. Or, okay, we need to work on this area a bit more. Yeah.
Yeah, Andy, when you're working with clients, is this something that you really get nailed down as early as you can? Because
yes, and we will often work with the clients on this collaboratively, and the whole design process is a collaborative process. And we will often sit down with a client and really work through this with them and understand the implications that certain requirements will have on a design. For instance, a classic simple example is somebody might come in and say, well, we want it waterproof. And you're like, okay, so well, what does waterproof mean? What does it need to be submerged 5 meters down, or does it just need to be splash proof? So there's lots of, it's that real level of detail. And then so that really shows in what goes in it. So it's your physical requirements, usability requirements, performance requirements, technical and environmental. But also a big one is the regulatory standards. And I know we'll hear more about that later on in the afternoon. But that any regulations that the product must meet are critical to know from the start. And so the final section really is how to engage with designers and companies like OPD. So number one really is engage early. We, as designers, we can have a massive impact on your product strategy and the way you get to market. So often we get companies come to us and they're really near the end of their development cycle, but they've got a product that just isn't working and time's running out and sort of hemorrhaging money. So really it's about engaging designers early so that we can have the best impact. And it's really key to value that investment in design. ultimately design is a complex process and it's not an easy process. And I think it often gets underestimated. But investment in design will absolutely pay itself back at the end. If you have a good, well-designed product at the end of it, the return on investment will be through the roof. So it contributes to your success. And as I say, it's a difficult process, but it is a process. There's a science to it. But having said that, it doesn't always go right first time. So it's important to fail fast and learn. And so that comes down to prototyping and testing. And you learn from everything you do that doesn't work. And then it's that cyclical process of feeding that back in so you get a better product out at the end of the day. And this is, I always really like this page because the cost of change over time goes up exponentially as you go through the process. So when you're in the early stages, doing your research, defining the problem, initial kind of concepting, if you want to pivot and meet new needs or change the design, or you learn something new that you haven't accounted for before, it's very easy to change at the start. But if you go all the way down through the process and you get towards the end and you've got a finished design and you're in the deliver phase, but suddenly you find out that, oh, actually, we really need it to do this now instead, or our competition is doing this. To then change that and take that step back is a massive cost in both time and money.
So I was doing one exercise with a larger public organisation, and they wanted a new website. So I said, well, I'll work. Then they chose this particular company in Derby to build it, and the web company wanted me involved between the two to make sure to kind of manage the process. And I used a bit of an old-fashioned technique called time boxing. And I said first time box will be the spec, and until that's signed off, we're not moving forward. And the client would say, "We've got to get going, got to go. You haven't built anything yet. Time to click on." I said, "No, until we sign off on the spec, you might change stuff. Then we're going to have a horrible conversation about changing scope. It's going to delay everything. Let's get the spec up and done. Once we've done that, we can then deliver it." And we delivered it to time, cost, and quality, despite forcing them to get the spec absolutely right.
And I can see it from their point of view, in that it feels frustrating potentially. You want to dive in straight away, but it's taking that time to lay the foundation properly makes the rest of the process so much smoother and more cost effective. And it enables you to kind of work in. The way we work is what we would call sprints, and which is very similar. So we'll kind of sprint to the next objective, and then kind of learn from each one. So this next slide here really is about the sectors and their challenges. So, for instance, if you have a medical product, it's a very highly regulated industry, so it's high risk and as a result, generally high investment. And so your lead times are very long. Whereas with a consumer product, it tends to be much more rapid turnover, much faster paced development, because there's always a new model coming out, designs changing with fashion, for instance, or every company's looking for the next big thing. And so it's really high volume products, but rapid turnaround. And then you get the industrial and scientific products. So these tend to be very high spec, some very often safety critical. And so again, in similar way to medical, it's key you get the designs right on this. And there's, again, lots of regulations and approval standards that have to be met, lots of testing required. And then on top of those, there's always the common challenges as well, so which kind of surround any project. So this can be sustainability is obviously a big one, and we're very keen on making sure that the products we design consider sustainability from the start. The time to market as well. You may have time critical goals that you need to meet, and so that goes back to that engaging the designers early. Cost, the IP landscaping as well, trying to understand what freedom you have to operate as a designer, what patents are out there that we can't infringe on, and so on. And then on top of that, you've got the manufacturing and logistics. Very often it's Far Eastern manufacture, but this is, it's a bit of a changing world at the moment, and there's much more local manufacturing going on, or moving to different areas of the world. But then with sustainability as well, the logistics is also a big challenge of that. And basically government legislation as well plays a big role in the design. So really, just to summarize and kind of wrap up my section, really the key takeaway should be to use design to help you shape your strategy. Don't think of design as just kind of actually designing a casework for an actual product or just designing some new technology. It can be a much broader spectrum than that, and we can really help the company with its goals and move the company forward. Engage the designers early, get us involved, give us the time to work and lay those foundations. Do your homework as well, and that means doing the research, speaking to the users, or working with us to help you do that. I just cannot say how important it is to have real-world user feedback, which you can implement into a design. And that enables you to understand that problem fully. And then focusing on the user, everything you do really should be based around, is this making the device or the design better for the user? And if it's not, then really need to think about why you're doing something or whether it's the right thing to be doing. Be aware of the challenges. For instance, when we just talked about the different sector challenges, be aware of those hurdles that you may meet, and have a strategy for overcoming them. And really the final thing is to learn from the feedback. Like I say, it's a cyclical process. Not everything works first time, but laying those groundwork helps make it so it's more likely to work first time.
Yeah.
But yeah, there's always a learning cycle when you go through the process.
Yeah. So just we've been doing a product recently, and what we came up with, what we now want to go and raise money against this great product idea. But what we've done, we've now set about, we've engaged end users, but we now need to evidence that. So we've been to a number of conferences, and we've identified where talks are happening and by industry professionals that are underpinning the need.
Sure.
They're kind of, we're using that to, when we go to work, to have defined the problem, because we know what the problem is, but to actually get that verified by external bodies and external professionals is really important. And on that same project, what we're also looking at is you did earlier about who's going to buy this, and with a medical device, that's really important, because is it going to be the NHS? Is it an insurance company in the States? Is it a private individual? Who's going to pay? So there's an awful lot of homework you have to do before just launching into designing the next best mousetrap, isn't there, sort of thing?
100%, 100%.
Yeah, that has been absolutely amazing. I know it's been an absolute whistle-stop talk, but
yeah,
folks, these slides will be available. Please take a chance to reflect on them at your own leisure. There's some real gold nuggets, and Oxford Product Design, they're one of our they put into the challenge award package at the back end, and I think it's up to a week's design effort from you guys. And you've seen the quality of the presentation and some of the work they've done. Do take advantage of that if you're one of the lucky winners. But Andy, brilliant. Thank you so much.
All right, thank you.
I'm just having a quick look. Great presentation. Yeah, great presentation. So yeah, great feedback there. Okay, look at that. We're on time for once. This is absolutely amazing. I'd like to welcome on stage Greg, online, Greg and Jag from Foresters. We've worked with Foresters for quite a number of years. Absolutely terrific IP company. We've used them on a number of clients. Got a great relationship. And Jag and Greg, big thank you for sponsoring this workshop. As always, looking forward to seeing you at the Innovation Challenge in October. But over to you. Talk to me about IP protection.
Okay, great. Thank you, Sam, for the glowing introduction. And yes, it's been great working with you guys and being part of the challenge this year and this year's workshop as well. So let me just try and get my slides working.
Shall I do it, Jack?
This okay, should be able to.
You're doing it, okay.
Yeah, got it. Got it.
Cool.
Thank you. Okay, so just let me know if you can see all that first before I.
Yeah, good to go.
Yeah.
Perfect. Okay. Right. So this workshop, we're looking at all sorts of things. Like we had a great presentation now from Oxford Product Design about getting your new product kind of realized and thinking about how you want to make it suitable for your customers to make it as successful as possible. And later on, you'll hear from other people as well around other aspects of your product. But at this stage, probably a lot of you have got your kind of amazing idea or your amazing bit of tech. And that might be the only asset you have. That's what you might think. And actually, at this stage, thinking about and engaging around intellectual property protection, IP protection is really important, because if you don't get this right, it could be the make or break for your business. And I'm sure Sam's got some stories to tell about things like that as well that we'll get onto. So first of all, a bit about Forrester. So we're a specialist firm of patent and trademark attorneys. So we are different to kind of solicitors or lawyers, if you like, in the sense that we are the guys that come in and help your business get your registered patents, your trademarks, or your designs. Whereas IP solicitors or lawyers are generally involved giving advice on agreements that have IP in them, for example, licensing a patent, or when you sell a business and you're selling IP as part of a business, that's what a solicitor would typically be involved in. Whereas us guys, a lot of us are technically trained. So I'm a physicist, Greg is as well. And we need to have that training in order to be a patent attorney, so we can actually understand the technology well enough to protect it in a legal sense. A bit about Forrester. So we established back in 1884. We're celebrating our 140-year anniversary this year. We have offices all over the UK. So I'm based in Birmingham with Greg. We have offices Liverpool, London, and Munich as well. And because of our size, we're quite large as a firm in this industry. We've got a really great team of attorneys that can handle all sorts of technical matter, all sorts of legal issues as well, and areas of law involving IP. And actually, the way that we kind of couch ourselves as a firm is that we really believe in this thing called clear direction. We're here to be on your side, helping you make decisions involving your IP that are kind of commercially focused. So when we give advice, it's very much about giving you direction as to what you need to do, rather than kind of sitting on the fence and sort of giving you pros and cons of an argument, rather than just sort of saying, look, we understand your business, we know what you need to do, and we think based on that, this is what we would recommend that you do, rather than you sort of having to do all that or decipher the legal advice for yourself. So I'm a partner here in Birmingham. I'm a UK and European patent attorney, and my client base is mostly SMEs. Work with all sorts of technologies, from 3D printing, medtech, quantum computing, jewelry technology as well. Actually, it's quite interesting. And I've also got some roles in the past that I've had around advising around strategy in IP for larger organizations like universities. And I also work alongside a great network of contacts, including TBAT, that we really value, to help support our clients. So I'll hand over now to Greg to say a bit about himself.
Hi, so I'm Greg. That's a picture of me when I had longer hair. That went
I was going to say, you've had a haircut, haven't you, Greg? Yeah.
Just a little bit. Yeah.
Very smart, very smart. I mean, you were smart
Thank
then,
you.
but you're even smarter now.
Yeah, my head's very cold though. So I've got a degree in physics, like Jack said, from Leicester, and I work with a whole spectrum of clients, all the way from startups through to multinationals. So I've got a good experience with working with clients across the whole kind of range of different needs that they might have. Also work in quite a broad range of technologies, so from fast-moving consumer goods through to medtech. That's one of my favourites, and then also things like aerospace and defence and various other things, and a smattering of stuff in between. And yeah, I also enjoy working alongside advisors like TBAT as well. It's really fun and rewarding to be able to help people craft strategies around patents and the like, to be able to help benefit their business. That's me. Okay,
great. So we'll start with a basic sort of overview, really, in terms of intellectual property. And we've got on here the screen a smartphone that you might recognize, although actually maybe I'm showing my age now in that this is what the iPhone used to look like.
That's an iPhone 3, that is, Jack.
Yes, that's right. So that might predate a few of you in the audience, but I assure you it is what the iPhone used to look like back in the day. And this is an example of a product that's done really well in the marketplace, and leading the kind of sales all for so many years now. And Apple are a company that really invests in innovation and R&D. and taking the example of Apple, there's all sorts of aspects around its iPhone that they've protected. And the way to look at IP is sort of saying, well, what is it about this product, or this, in this case, the iPhone, that makes it really attractive and valuable to Apple and to consumers, who want to own it and buy it. And then working backwards from there to sort of say, well, how do we protect that? How do we make sure that that investment we're making to make this really attractive, commercially valuable product, we get the massive, the best return we can on that, rather than other people sort of walking away with the fruits of your labor. And so if you take the iPhone, there's actually multiple IP rights associated with it. So if you take the appearance of the iPhone, which is always one of the things that are most commented on when you look at, smartphone reviews, for example, that is something that can be protected through design rights, which we'll talk about later in detail. If you take the branding around the iPhone, there's all sorts of actual branding with the iPhone. One is the word Apple itself. There's the word iPhone. And then there's the logo, the Apple sort of half-eaten apple logo as well. Those are all examples of branding, which each can be protected by a trademark. So that's what trademarks protect, the branding of the phone. Moving on, the software that actually makes the iPhone work, that's something that can be protected through copyright. Again, we'll talk about in more detail later. But actually, in some circumstances, software can be protected by patents as well. So there's a little question mark there on the slide. That's because, for example, if the software is operating the battery in a certain way in order to conserve energy, then that is something considered to be a technical problem that's being solved by the software. And so that can be enough to qualify for patent protection, which again, we'll talk about later. And actually, there are other aspects of the iPhone that could be protected by patents as well. So generally, anything to do with functionality, the iPhone, for example, the way in which the button works, the fingerprint technology, kind of sensor technology, the camera, or the data encryption techniques, they're all things which can be protected by patents. And it can even just protect the composition of the material that makes up the casing as well, circumstances as well. So patents protect all sorts of things like that. Then there's two lesser known rights, which I think you should all be thinking about as a business. All of you will have some form of intellectual property already that you just may not be aware of, like those unknown kind of unknowns that Sam was talking about. Or known unknowns in this case, because you're at the workshop where you're learning about IP. So one of these is trade secrets, and trade secret is something which, as the name suggests, is something that you've kept a secret as a business. So Apple may know things about its technology or its business model that it's kept as a secret because it doesn't want other people to know, because they might be able to reverse engineer it and sort of take advantage of that secret. And that's something that all of your businesses might have as well within your business. Things like, client contacts and things like this, customer lists, things like that you could try and keep secret. And actually, one of the reasons you might want to think about trade secrets is if most of the other rights, like patents in particular, you have to disclose what your idea is in order to get that protection in the first place. And once it's disclosed, like with a patent, you might get protection, but it's often time limited. It's 20 years. Whereas if a trade secret, you don't have to disclose what it is, but you might have protection for even longer. And some types of things that you might want to protect, you can't actually protect by any of the other IP rights other than keeping them secret. So that's something to be thinking about. And then the other aspect of protection that's often not thought about is something called know-how. And this is effectively the expertise you have within your business, within your employees or internal processes or procedures that you use as a business. So you develop databases that you develop over time, kind of algorithms, for example. When your team know how to get certain stuff done, that type of knowledge can actually be commercialized as an IP right, where you effectively become like a consultant, where people get to pay for access to your expertise. And often know-how is actually part of deals involving IP, where you kind of license your knowledge to companies involved with your business.
I did an IP audit for a company a few years ago, and they did investment casting of like aerospace components, and they wanted an IP audit of their business. And exactly what you've got there, it wasn't just, they didn't have any patents, but for them it was all around their trade secrets and their expertise. So I mean, they had trademarks which we identified, but it was also always their process of taking what the client wanted into producing the first prototype to put it into production, and now how they could do it in a far shorter time scale and for better quality than the competition. And I was capturing all of that as part of the IP audit. And when they came to sell the business, this became quite a big play in the valuation. So
Yeah.
it isn't just the main ones that you think about. It can be, say, trade secrets, expertise, really important.
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you for that, Sam. Also, what's happened there? We lost the slide there. Bring it back up.
I did another piece of work for this company, and they did the elephant's feet you see in kebab shops. And so they had this team of people making these elephant feet. But when it came to add the spices into the meat, they sent everybody outside the factory. The boss would go to the safe in the wall and get out the special herbs and spices, sprinkle them in, put the machine on, and then go back into his office and lock it away, and then let everybody back in. Because in that industry, they sell on flavour, and other companies send spies in to try and get a sample of the mix that they add to the meat to give them that differential piece. It was absolutely fascinating chatting to this fella. Anyway, there you go. I digress. While you get your slides up.
Thank you for that, Sam. So IP rights can help your business in loads of ways. So obviously, one is to protect your idea and increase the value of your business. If it's protected, like Sam said, if someone looking to buy your business out, you might get a better price for your company. If you've got things protected that are important to the company, helps you get investment, grant funding. You might be able to commercialize by licensing your IP as well, which I think Ed will talk about later. And one more recent one is you can actually reduce your tax bill. So you could get a reduction in patented kind of technologies, profit from those, from a corporation tax headline rate of 25% down to 10%. So, that's something to bear in mind as well. But the main thing to think about here, like Sam's sort of talking about as well, those examples, is you really need to think about your business strategy and then work backwards almost to see, okay, what intellectual property rights can you use to make that strategy succeed? And, when you come to any stage of your business will involve IP considerations, whether you're a startup, your established business, or you're kind of on the way to kind of like growing quickly and expanding in other territories, collaborating, getting grant funding, investment, all of these things involve IP. So hopefully for the rest of this presentation, when we talk about the different IP rights, it might be starting to get kind of things, kind of light bulb moments with you in the audience. So I'll hand over to Greg now to talk about patents.
Thank you, Jack. Can we have the next slide, please? So patents are all about protecting how things work, or technical innovations, as it were, inventions. As Jack mentioned, there's lots of different things that you can get patents for. So it can be kind of your standard sort of mechanical nuts and bolts. It can be methods of manufacture or processes. It can be chemicals, and sometimes it can even be software and things like that. So moving through the pictures that you can see there at the bottom. So moving from the bottom right, you've got a flip-flop there, which I think was developed by Allbirds. So this is directed to the particular way in which the thong of the flip-flop is connected to the sole of the flip-flop. Moving over just to the middle there, you've got a picture of like some standard nuts and bolts, and this is to point out that even if something might appear simple or kind of relatively straightforward, that doesn't necessarily preclude it from being patentable. So kind of going to your question here, James, I think, how do you define what's patentable over what went before? It is a question of whether or not something is new, which means is that combination of features which makes up the invention something which has been publicly disclosed before? And then the second question is, does it involve an inventive step? And what that question essentially involves is the combination of features that makes up the invention something that would have been obvious to someone of average skill in the field of that invention in question to have arrived at using kind of workshop modifications or anything like that. So Jack had a case, for example, where there was a relatively simple modification that was made to an existing device, but it was sufficient to get over that hurdle of inventive step to be able to obtain a patent. So don't discount something just because it appears straightforward. Moving just to the bottom left there, this is to indicate things like biological kind of innovations and things like that can also be potentially patentable, chemical assays, things like that. Moving up to the top left, this is from Uber, an Uber application where they've looked to provide an optimized route guidance system based on a way of splitting up different road systems, I believe it's through hexagons. And then at the top right, that is an application from Visa to do with card security. So that is one of the potential permitted things to do with software, is to improve the security of transactions. Is there anything you want to add to that, Jack?
No,
good. Could I have the next slide, please?
So I think in answer to James's question, there's lots of stuff, and that's a great definition you did. Am I right in saying, you might shoot me down in flames here, that I think patent agents and their professional body suggest that a 15-20 minute chat is available for somebody from the public to go in and chat? I don't know if you still run that kind of scheme.
Yeah, we'd be more than happy to talk to you if there's something where you think that, well, you're not sure and you just want to kind of have a quick kind of sense check on it and see if you think there might be any merit going further on that. Then yeah, we'd be happy to do that for you, no problem at all.
Brilliant, thank you.
So yeah, no problem. You're welcome, James. So as Jack mentioned, patents last up to 20 years, provided the renewal fees are paid. It's important that you keep your invention confidential until you file your patent application, because otherwise that could be prejudicial to you obtaining a patent, because it has to be new as of the date you file the patent application. And the other thing to remember is that patents are territorial, so you can get UK patents, European patents, US patents, and so on. So you should seek protection in those territories which are commercially important to you. That's it from me on patents, I think, Jack. Next slide.
Okay, great. So moving on to trademarks. Yeah, like all of you as businesses will have some form of branding, and this can all be protected by a trademark. But the legal definition of what a trademark is put up on the slide there. It's something which can distinguish, your business's goods and services from those of your competitors. So it's a way that a consumer can, when it buys something with a certain trademark on it, it knows that that thing, that object, that product, that service has come from who they think it's come from, and effectively it's your brand. And because of that requirement, certain things are not allowed to be protected and as a registered trademark, things which are descriptive or laudatory as well, but I won't talk too much about those here. But just bear in mind that not all types of branding can be protected by a trademark. So on this screen now, you can see examples of different registered trademarks. So Uber, Gymshark, Salts, these are all examples there on the screen, which actually have more than one type of registered right in them as a trademark. So with the Uber logo there, you can actually protect Uber as a word itself as a trademark, which is great, because that means that you protect any form of reproduction of the word Uber as a registered trademark. But you can also protect the stylized version of the word as well, or the logo as a whole. So that will protect the way that's kind of stylized. So that could be its own separate protection from the word Uber as well. And if you look at the Gymshark logo there, it's a similar example there, but it's actually got also the shark head, which could be registered in its own right as a trademark, as well as in combination with Gymshark. And then actually more sort of uncommon, you might not think of as being trademarks, you can actually protect as well. So for example, on the far right, you've got the color scheme there from Stanley Black & Decker, that's designated in relation to DIY tools, which is protected as a trademark. And then also at the bottom there, you've got this kind of quills, which are actually that registered application was about the scent of the quills. So you can actually protect scents as well as a trademark. Slogos like Just Do It can be protected, holograms and shapes as well. So all sorts of things can actually function as a trademark. So it's worth kind of looking at that when you create a new bit of branding or a product to understand which things could actually function as a trademark. When it comes to registering a trademark, you have to go and apply to have registered protection. And this obviously starts with a couple of steps before that, which one is to create the trademark to start with. And the reason we've put that on as a separate step is because I mentioned that some forms of branding cannot be protected as a registered trademark. So it's important to get professional advice at the beginning to check that whether or not the branding that you're developing is something that can actually be protected at all. Once you've gone through that stage of kind of advice, which we can give to you, at no cost in initial, meeting, we often do that for clients from the beginning. You then, most companies might jump straight to protection at that stage, but actually we always recommend having clearance done first, which involves checking that your suggested brand is actually free to use and that no one else has actually got registered protection already. One of the common things we find is businesses often sort of search Google or do a check on Companies House, sort of say, look, we can't find anything that's got this same name, so we think we're free to go and register our trademark. But actually, that's not where they should be looking. They should be looking on the trademark registers, because that's where the registration sits. And if you don't do that, then you could have a nasty surprise later on, where when you go to apply for protection, you could find that the trademark office or the examiner will find an earlier conflicting mark that's similar enough to your mark that there's a conflict. And in that situation, you could find that you have to abandon your application altogether, or your application will be opposed by the earlier rights holder. So it could be that you've spent, a year, 2 years of branding and, taking your brand to market, and then you look to protect it and you find that actually it's too late. There's a problem that there's a registered mark already, which means you have to start again. And unfortunately, that is more common than you might think. So just be careful about that if you go down the route of protection.
So one of the things it might be, you want a trademark to call your new garage something like fast cars, but that probably may not be allowed because they're two common words plugged together quite often. And if I Google fast cars, you see loads of pictures. If you called it jelly cars or octopus cars, you don't often see those two words together. So that might be a stronger case.
Yeah,
but
exactly.
It's always getting that bit of advice before you start investing in the overall creation, the investment in the brand, in the marketing materials, if you have a view to trademark, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, very good example. So like you think of like Octopus, Google, Apple, some of the best brands out there are ones that are completely unrelated to what their goods are. They really stand out.
Yeah.
So so hopefully you get yourself a registered trademark, but actually the journey doesn't stop there, because not only do you need to pay renewal fees like a patent to keep your trademark in force, but you actually have to think about a couple of other things as well. One is that are you actually using your trademark in the way that it's been registered? Because if your brand changes over time, then your registered trademark might be vulnerable to a cancellation for non-use. So if for example, your logo starts to change 5 or 6 years down the line, and you haven't updated your protection to cover that that new logo, then it might be that you don't have any registered protection anymore that's valid. And the other thing is that you do need to kind of actively manage and maintain your portfolio when you start protecting your brand. So, and also when you pay renewal fees, thing to note is that your protection can last forever as long as you pay the fees, compared to the other rights, which are all time limited, and they also territorial. So you need to get protection in each of the countries of importance to you. Okay, so I'll hand over to Greg now to talk about designs.
Thanks, Jack. Go to the next slide, please. So designs are effectively the aesthetic counterpart to patents. They protect how things look rather than how things work. So it's all about the appearance, a whole part of a product. That can include packaging, typefaces, logos, all sorts. It doesn't have to be a physical product itself. They last a bit longer than a patent at 25 years, but the renewal fees are only every 5 years, and they're relatively low cost compared to patents. And you can file multiple designs in one application as well, which reduces the cost even further. Could I have the next slide, please? So here's some examples of some designs, and it kind of links back to some of the companies we've already talked about. So starting from the top right, we've got a Gymshark top there. So you can see that what they've sought to protect here is not only the shape of the product itself, but also the colorways on there and that sort of thing. So if you're ever looking at protecting a design, the more information and attributes that you put into the application, the more limited the scope of protection the design will have. So the broadest you can go is black and white line drawings, and the narrowest you can go as a photograph effectively. So you probably don't want a photograph unless you want to try and catch exact copies. You want to go for as broad as you can there, probably black and white line drawings, or unless the colorways are important to you. Moving around to the bottom right there, we've got computer icons. So this is the Uber app, and then what they've sought to protect here is the actual icon itself in the app. You might be able to see that the phone and the rest of the application is shown in dashed lines. What this indicates is that they have disclaimed that part of the design, so they're not looking to seek protection for that. It's just the icon. Moving to the middle there, you can see the Apple iPhone logo. So this is useful because it can protect the logo whilst you're waiting for your trademark registration to grant. So it provides that interim sort of protection to make sure you're covered in that time. Or perhaps you don't want to incur the cost of a trademark application overseas, but a design is fine. Moving to the bottom left, this is an Allbirds design again. So on the right-hand image, they've disclaimed most of the shoe, but what they're looking to protect is actually the shape of the sole, the grooves in it, the tread. because that's the bit they care about. And then on the left, what you've got there is they've tried to protect the surface decoration in isolation on the shoe, but without the shape of the shoe. So they've highlighted it in yellow to say this is the actual bit that we care about protecting there.
And so with a car tyre, so
Mhm.
you might, so that again could have loads of different IP, because you might have the tread, which might be design, but it could also be patented, the way it dispels water. There's
Yeah,
the
absolutely.
build up of the tyre. Yeah, okay.
Yeah, it will depend on what's dictated the shape of the tread. So if it's aesthetics, then it's going to be more leaning towards design. If there's some sort of functional component to it, which is quite common, then it might be more towards a pattern. Sometimes it's a bit of a grey area, and it's worth having both. Is there anything you want to add to that, Jack?
No, absolutely. That very good example. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah,
3 or
that's a
4
great
minutes,
example,
guys. 3 or 4 minutes. Yeah.
No
Okay.
problem.
Yeah.
And then just going up to the top left there, you've got packaging of a product like a water bottle as well. And then there in the middle, you've got a good old-fashioned Vax cleaner. So that's the broadest that you can go, is those black and white line drawings. Next slide, please, Jack. Is it going, the slide? Yeah. Okay. Yep. So that was designs, and now we've moved on to copyright here. So this is copyright covers an enormous variety of creations, as it says there. So it protects the expression of an idea, not the idea itself. So this is important for software to understand. So for copyright in software, it protects the actual lines of code that you've written, not the actual result that the software produces at the end. So if someone were to see your code and understand what you're inputting and what's output, they could independently go away and develop their own code to do the same thing. That would not necessarily be an infringement of copyright, depending on how they derived it and how far. Like if they were to kind of get it via nefarious means, then that might be slightly different. But it only protects against copying itself rather than the expression of the idea. It's a relatively narrow form of protection because it protects against copying, as the name suggests, but it's got quite a long duration, 70 years from the end of the creator's death. Most businesses will have some form of copyright, be that in terms of your kind of copy in your leaflets or something like that. And also potentially databases and things that you might hold as well. Is there anything you want to add to that, Jack?
No, other than to say that, yeah, copyright's automatic, like I think Greg mentioned, so you don't have to apply for it, you don't have to register for it. It automatically, it's there as soon as you've created the work, provided it's original over things that have gone in the past. So we'll move on now to, just conscious of time, so we'll move on to ownership now. So, the one is to think about getting protection in the first place, but you actually need to think about whether you own the rights to the IP first before you can look at protecting it, which sounds like an obvious statement, but actually it can be more complicated than that in practice. So these are the general rules for this. I'm sure Ed will talk about it later as well in his presentation after us. So the general rule is that if the person who creates the work is the person who owns the IP, but it does change depending on their status and the circumstances. So if the person who created it is an employee, then generally speaking, if it's done as part of their employment duties, then the right will automatically belong to their employer. But if a company, for example, engages a third party like Oxford Product Design to develop a product for them, then the IP generated associated with that product would belong to the design agency or the designer who worked on the design, rather than the person who paid for that product to be produced in the first place, unless there's a written agreement in place beforehand to say that any IP generated, any work created as part of that engagement would belong to you as a business for commissioning it in the first place. So it's important that you think about this when you're working with any third parties, in particular, designers and kind of technical support outside of your business. And particularly if you're looking to get grant funding or investment, think about IP ownership. Often there's clauses that might affect how far you can actually own the IP, or you have to give up rights to the IP when you get, an investment or collaboration going. So always just kind of think about IP ownership of it alongside protection, if not before protection in the first place.
What about things like freedom to operate pieces of work and that sort of thing? Oh, as if by
Excellent. We
magic.
were just coming on to that. Yes.
It's like you knew what was there, Sam.
Yeah.
I didn't.
So yeah, as Sam's just pointed out, alongside you thinking about protecting all your IP, there'll be your competitors that are thinking of doing the same thing. And so it's also important to look at whether or not any of the things that you want to do might infringe other people's IP rights. So are there any other patents, designs, or trademarks out there which could present an issue to what you want to do, like a similar name or a similar functionality in what you are hoping to commercialize? You can do different types of clearance work around that. So you can get professional level searching done to see if there's anything that's going to be a barrier to you doing that. Or you can go for looking at a list of what your competitors and looking at what IP they might have. It really does depend on your risk appetite. As Jags mentioned, making sure that you've sorted out your ownership issues, make sure that you own the IP that you want to commercialize. And then finally, in terms of access to IP, if you're collaborating with anyone, say you're spinning out of university or something like that, then making sure that you can access the IP that they might have such that you can springboard from that to do what you want to do when you spin out. It's really important that there's written agreements in place and things like that so that you're solid, especially if you're going to look for investment and the like. I imagine it's likely that they'll want to know that those agreements are in place so that you can do what you want to.
Yeah, that's quite an interesting one, because we're looking at licensing some IP out from a company at the moment, and we're looking to engage an industry specialist to help on that process, and we're trying to sort out the contract. So if he comes out, well, if you paint it pink, it would be a lot better. Brilliant, we should have thought about that. That needs to go as part of the IP when we license it. We can't have him saying, well, I own it and I'll give you a license to use it for a period of 10 years, because that completely kiboshes any chance of licensing it. So getting that sorted out is really, really important.
Yes, absolutely. Really should. Yeah, I wouldn't want to leave that hanging if it were my business.
No, no, no.
So I'm sure Ed will talk a bit more detail about those points as well, actually, in his presentation. So that'll be interesting to see what he has to say.
Yeah,
Thank you.
I've got. I know we're running a little bit late, but never mind. So say you've engaged a design agency to do you a logo. They own it, but do they give you a license in perpetuity to use it, having paid for them to create it, sort of thing?
It could be, yeah. You kind of like you have. So the thing that you normally get is you get like an implicit license to use that logo because you engage them to create the logo for your business use. But where ownership comes in is where you might take a logo that, or often with software actually, that you start working with one software coder to begin with at the beginning to get your software off the ground, and then you want to have it maintained or you want to change the software. And so actually at the moment, if you don't have the ownership agreement beforehand, when you commission the original software, then you don't own the copyright. So you might want to take that software that's on your system and give it to another coding company. But because you don't own the copyright, you only have the right to use it in your business. That means you can't really have it, you can't give it to another coder without infringing the copyright of the original author. So that's where ownership kicks in, if that can answer your question, sir.
Yeah.
It's a good question. And actually, we know of a business where they didn't do that early on. And when they came to sell their business, the due diligence that was done on the business, the person buying the business identified there's a bit of software that the company had which seemed quite important. And they asked them whether they owned the copyright in it. And when they went through their records, they realized that they didn't have a written agreement about the copyright. So the value of the business went from being something like 10 million to potentially peanuts, because they weren't prepared to buy it unless they had the copyright ownership.
Yeah.
So that business had to go back to the original coder and pay a fortune for the coder to then sign and sell the IP back to the business. So it's a bit of a car crash, which can happen from really an innocent mistake.
Yeah. Wow. Okay. Guys, thank you very, very much. Again, amazing to have you on board as a sponsor for this workshop, and always lovely to hear you guys speak, because your knowledge of the subject area is absolutely brilliant. There's one quick question from Nick. Copyright 50 years beyond the death of somebody, patents cost a fortune, only 20 years. And I think that's really around a patent you can apply to lots of different areas, and you can create your own product and sell it copyright Yes, you can make money on the back of it, but they are two very different things, aren't they?
Oh, absolutely.
And
So-
a patent, my understanding, is kind of a contract between you and the state, where you put it into the public domain to have a legal mechanism to protect your idea while you commercialize it for a period of 20 years.
Yeah.
Is it?
Yeah, I
Correct.
mean, the other thing about it is patents are about technology. So it'd be a bit of an injustice to the society, maybe, that someone doesn't have access to this technology for 50 years or 70 years. If you think about that as a life cycle.
Yeah.
Compared to whereas copyright protects narrower things generally. So you can still, like, make a film that involves, animated animals, and make money from it.
Yeah.
Without infringing copyright for some, well-recognized animations, if you like. But it'd be a shame if for patents you couldn't do anything for 50 years because someone else had invented it, in the 1950s.
Yeah, guys, brilliant. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
I think you're staying on the call, but hidden in the background. So if there's any questions, I'll give you a clear heads up to
Great.
talk to you. Okay, brilliant. Ed.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Ed Wright from Shakespeare's. Are you there?
I am indeed. Thank you very much, Jag and Greg. That was really informative.
That kind of thing. Are you there, Eddie? It's just like the Eurovision, isn't it? Calling Estonia. Can you hear me, Estonia? Yes, here we are, Sam. So brilliant. Thanks for coming on board, Ed. I'm going to run your slides. So,
Okay.
and then what we're going to do, folks, we'll have a quick 5-10 minute break after Ed speak, and then we'll finish the next four presentations. Then that'll be it. So, Ed, over to you.
Okay. Thank you very much, Sam. Let's move to the next slide along.
And the one beyond there. There we go. Overview.
There we go. Okay. This is no more than a sort of preparatory slide to hopefully give some indication of what I will get to touch upon. How long do I have to work
Kind
this
of
through, Sam?
let me have a look. I've got a timing sheet here, Ed.
Okay.
Piece of paper number 16. Got kind of 25 minutes, Ed.
That's fine. Okay, perfect.
Yeah.
Let's go on to the next slide then, Sam. So in the context of ownership, and again, this overlaps to an extent with what Jag and Greg were talking about at the end of their talk. The premise is that the right, in effect, to protect and therefore sue upon a piece of intellectual property normally vests in the owner, or in some particular cases, depending on the license that's being afforded to a particular licensee, it may well be afforded to it in conjunction with a number of other things, such as the maintenance of the intellectual property in question and the payment of renewal fees. But the grand scheme of things, the original owners, the first owners of any piece of intellectual property are as identified on that particular slide. Again, you will have seen from Jag and Greg's presentation that employment generates a bit of a distortion of that, because if an employee creates something in the course of fulfilling their duties, then it will vest in the employer. And also in a commissioned work sense, design rights and copyright can, if and to the extent there's a written agreement in respect of which there is an appropriate express written assignment provided within that agreement, then again, the commissioning party may acquire ownership contractually rather than the commissioned party.
And with regards to employment, Ed, is it typical that it's really the IP that's associated with the company that you're working with? So say you worked for a roller skate manufacturer and you came up with a patent for a rubber dinghy, they won't be interested in that. And therefore, could they claim IP ownership of that? Whereas if you developed a better, faster roller skate, that's definitely in their field.
You're right. I mean, I think that's quite an interesting set of examples. What amounts to someone fulfilling their role in the normal course of their duties would, in all likelihood, generate an outcome where the advanced roller skating technology would be owned by the employer, and the rubber dinghy arrangement would be something that the employee would in all likelihood have invented in their own time, utilizing their own resources as a hobby or otherwise. So, independent of their role they're fulfilling for their employer.
Yeah. Cool.
Next slide, please. What I'm focusing on here, and again, it's related in some respects to the trade secrets and know-how that Jag and Greg were talking about. But the idea of And again, the context of this is very much sort of licensing in technology and third-party IP that you're trying to introduce into a product development arrangement. In any event, there's going to be some disclosure of confidential information of some shape and form between the parties in that particular context, and it's all likely going to be two-way, and some of it may in fact be highly innovative, not yet patented information that is going to need to be disclosed to facilitate whatever the purpose of the collaboration actually is. And again, you need to remain conscious at all times of the fact that something of know-how related nature, particularly of a functional technical nature, is likely to have a patentability to it if it's satisfying the criteria of newness, novelty, and industrial application. So you've got to bear in mind the value of confidential information, and you've got to go to great lengths to protect it and preserve your rights in respect of any future applications you may wish to make for protection of that IP. There is invariably this tension, if and to the extent that you're seeking to collaborate with an academic entity, because the parameters and things that they place importance upon are slightly different to that a private commercial entity would value, and the value of new and innovative matter is in a sense the publication of that and sort of peer assessment in an academic sense, whereas in a commercial private limited company sense, it would be very much seeking to protect that by way of confidentiality. But in any event, you've also got to also consider that confidentiality is not simply to be preserved during the course of pre-contractual discussions or, in fact, during the course of a collaboration. It's also got inherent confidentiality and inherent value in the maintenance of secrecy beyond the nature of and extent of the relationship, and that needs to be recognized as well. Confidential information doesn't simply just cease to be confidential because a collaboration ends. And particularly, again, where you're dealing with extremely important trade secrets of a given company, if and to the extent that they're ever disclosed.
Yeah.
Next slide, please. Having said all of that, there is one fail-safe mechanism for avoiding disclosure, avoiding misuse of any particular confidential information, despite the fact that you may have a very well drafted confidentiality agreement, and that's to simply practically not disclose it. In the same way that Sam's example of a chap who came in and applied seasoning to kebab-based arrangements in private, without any possibility of anyone gathering what the recipe was, is, again, an example of such a practical measure. But I think it's a very important proposition whenever you're thinking about a collaboration on the basis of seeking some form of IP to be licensed into a product development arrangement, that you actually both parties determine what needs to be disclosed in the context of those pre-contractual discussions. Now, those conversations need to be meaningful and they need to be suitably compelling, but they don't need to be revealing everything and shouldn't. So alongside a well-drafted NDA, I would suggest that there needs to be some practical consideration about what it is that's necessary to disclose at any given point.
And I think that's quite important when you think about Innovate UK grants. So you might be in a collaboration with another company and or a university, and there is a standard, I forgot the name of it. It's a UK recognised kind of a confidential contract about people working together. I forgot the name of it, it's gone out of my head. But that still needs very, very carefully looking into, because foreground, background IP, who owns what. If I'm working with you as a collaboration and I need your IP, but we fall out and that completely scuppers what I've been working on, there needs to be residual rights to access certain, it can get really complicated, can't it?
I agree. The scoping of an NDA and the scoping of what disclosures amount to confidential information is extremely important, as are the very clear defining of what a permitted purpose actually is when it comes to the usage of that. And if and to the extent that there are intellectual property rights in there, that should not be the domain of a confidentiality agreement. There should be no form of licensing afforded in an NDA, except and to the extent that there is a use or a necessary use and a necessary need to access the information to evaluate whether, in fact, an IP licensing arrangement is the way that the parties want to proceed. Next slide, please. And again, in the context of considering what confidential information to reveal or not to reveal, again, the purpose of any pre-contractual disclosures would always be to determine whether the parties are happy to collaborate and contract together. If we take the IP licensing example that Sam has referred to, there is a very good need in many respects to determine what the areas of mutual consensus actually are at the outset. You have an alternative, obviously, which is to go straight into trying to agree a license agreement if you feel that there's sufficient consensus, verbally speaking, between the parties. But that is a rare event. And actually, it's quite an interesting approach to adopt to, in effect, inform what follows. In other words, a fully commercial agreement premised upon a sort of well, not negotiated, but a well considered set of heads of terms is, I think, a very good position to get into, because you're ironing out the key terms in advance. You're probably dealing as part of that with the key commercial arrangements, and you're effectively writing a very helpful document when it comes to drafting and agreeing the terms, which should therefore be a far less protracted process. Like I said, it's horses for courses, and it's probably quite symptomatic of one party's feeling about the other party's approach to arrangement, particularly if they feel that there is possibly quite material areas of non-consensus. And it's quite an interesting way to try and flush out, if and to the extent they exist, what they may be.
Yeah.
But in any event, it's always to be borne in mind that the heads of terms themselves are inherently not binding unless you specifically state that they are in any respect or respects. So therefore, they will always proceed and be subject to the binding contract that follows. And again, their principal purpose is to set out the key terms, commercial or otherwise.
Yeah, I did dig a heads of terms out of a licensing deal I was involved with some years ago, and the heads of terms was all about the deal. But they said the one thing that is going to be legally binding on signature of this heads of terms are the IP arrangements.
Yeah, exactly.
Everything else is not legally binding, so that's then goes to contract. But the IP bit was the only legally binding bit in the heads of terms.
That's really interesting, and it's not uncommon, because with the type of agreement that we would tend to be considering as a direct result of a negotiation in this particular context and in the fields in which we tend to operate, that is almost always one of the biggest or the biggest set of concerns and considerations that the parties are going to get into. Not only from the point of view of scope of license and nature of license and the very characteristics that apply to it, but also the associated commercial arrangements. So I can see why that would then be almost immediately translated without any amendment, as it were, into the main contract.
Yeah. So the other bit on head of sorry Ed, was
okay.
So for the people in the audience, if you're looking to license some IP, so what I've seen before is the head of terms says we will access your IP and you will work with it stage one. That might elicit something up front, but on the completion of that, we move to stage two. If everybody's happy and there are termination clauses, then there might be another balloon payment at the start of stage two. So they know Baling Twine and Plasticine something works, and they're happy to now move to the next level. So I've seen them quite well structured as stage gates at the heads of terms to move into a nightmare to draft legally, I imagine, but it's kind of try before you fully buy.
Yeah, no, you're right, and it's a very pragmatic and practical approach to things, particularly when, well, from both parties' point of view, actually, because actually you're determining viability and efficacy from the point of view of the party principally involved in the advancement or the development. But equally, from the point of view of the primary paying party, you're also determining whether you're paying for something that's of worth and inherent viability. So, you can see from both parties' perspectives that it rather than dealing in a slightly clumsy and probably heavy-handed approach of sort of trying to put in place appropriate termination rights, as it were, you can get into a phasing arrangement that actually also ties in suitable payment arrangements that proceed to the extent necessary a suitable number of phases to determine commercial viability, and then also after determination of commercial viability successfully, hopefully, how the commercial proposition from there is to be sort of provided for.
Next.
So next slide, please. And these are the types of things that would, in all honesty, tend to result from pre-contractual discussions in the context of some form of innovation or intellectual property. It's by no means exhaustive, but it gives you a flavor of the types of things that an IP holder or a particular licensee or a combination of parties looking to try and create something would ultimately end up with in terms of form of agreement.
I think the R&D one is quite interesting, isn't it? Because in some fields, so I was just reviewing one with a client recently. It was to do with medtech, and they were doing it on behalf of an international company. And what they wanted was they had to own everything, because they need to have absolutely clean right to the IP to being able to fully commercialize it in confidence, spending billions. Whereas other times it's an R&D, and all the client wants is the output.
Yeah.
So you need to be very careful about when you engage with somebody. What is it you need to come out with? Do you need to own the IP, or do you just need the end product to fit into what you're doing?
You're absolutely right, Sam. That's to an extent, I think, a focus of what I will sort of speak with in a few minutes. But you're entirely right. In any sort of collaborative arrangement, two-party or multi-party, it's entirely right that you need to be thinking about what types of background IP are going to be contributed, what the rights are that are retained in respect of that, what the rights that are cross-licensed are in respect of that. And again, that should only be done on a need to have or need to access basis. But the elephant in the room is what happens to foreground IP that's generated, that comes into existence because of the collaboration, because of the R&D arrangement, and where ownership in respect of that lies, and whether it's allied to the existing background of intellectual property ownership arrangements, which is a sensible conclusion, or whether in fact, it sort of slightly distorts, and there are differing ownership and licensing arrangements, but nevertheless appropriate from the point of view of affording necessary access and necessary rights usage.
Yeah, and I was dealing with one license. It was to do into a cosmetics company, and it was a mascara brush, some technology in it to make it antibacterial. And so the license we did was for the use for mascara, but we said, and any other obvious developments of that into other products, we still retain
Precisely
a bite of the IP and hence the royalty, because we've given you the idea and the mechanism. The fact that you're now deploying it elsewhere and slightly tweaking it, it's all down to us. Thank you very much. We deserve a bit of bunts for that.
And that's again a very nice example of a very, very important consideration, which is the appropriate scoping of a license on a need to have basis. And no more than that, because the rights are inherently valuable, and the ability to engage in different applications of those rights or earn different revenue streams from different applications should be reserved by the owner.
Yeah, which is why you don't do it yourself, isn't it? And you come to somebody like you, Ed.
Quite possibly, Sam. Next slide, please. So this again goes into a little more sort of granularity about the points that Sam and I were just sort of debating and discussing. So whenever you're looking at the approach of licensing in intellectual property and dealing with third parties to that end, you need to determine, I suppose, exactly how and why and when the IP was created, and therefore the extent to which you require a certain scope of license, and this goes back again to this point of applicability, and what rights the licensor itself will wish to retain in the intellectual property, and to an extent what the scope and permitted field of use, I suppose, is of the licensed rights that are being afforded, as well as the parameters of those rights in terms of exclusivity, in terms of length and duration, in terms of geography, that sort of thing. You clearly need to, I think, reflect upon a particular policy arrangements and standard approaches that are taken by not only the licensor and the licensee, and to what degree there needs to be, appropriate and justified variance of that. But the key consideration is almost always where ownership lies, and to what extent licensing is required, and to what extent rights are then afforded to the licensee of an ongoing nature in respect of rights that would ordinarily be assumed by the owner. The nature of the licenses is probably the most fundamental aspect of things, because conferring a license of exclusive nature means that the licensor themselves is taking that package of rights and simply placing it in the hands of the licensee, for that licensee to use exclusively of the licensor and any other potential licensee for the period of time, and in respect of the geography in which it's being afforded. So not only do you need to consider that very carefully, you also need to consider the rights sacrifice that entails, and you need to make sure that there are minimum justifications that are to be achieved by the licensee to justify the continued sustaining of that license by way of minimum purchasing requirements or minimal royalty returns or revenue commitments, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
The same would apply in a sole license sense. That's quite akin to an exclusive license. It simply allows the licensor and the licensee to use the same package of rights, but no one else. And then you have a much more sort of open and liberal arrangement when it comes to non-exclusive arrangements.
Yeah, and so with that licensing in, or if I'm licensing something out, I think you touched on it there. It's, you don't want anybody to sit on something that you've just licensed to them.
Correct.
Especially if you've got a royalty attached to it, and they need to have some impetus to get it over the line and into the marketplace. So we did one recently, and there were payments annually, and then it slipped into a royalty. So the longer they kept it under wraps and didn't put it into the marketplace, these payments kept coming in.
Absolutely.
And that was actually quite a nice balance to encourage the company to get it into the marketplace.
Indeed, and it really sort of places emphasis on the licensor's requirements when it comes to affording such a license, which are totally justified and commercially reasonable. There are ways and means of attaching pinch points to the affording of such rights. Again, to the extent that minimum requirements aren't met, there could be a downgrading of license type. There could be an ability to keep the license as it is, but pay shortfall or forward order. There could be a number of sort of interesting commercial consequences of not allowing. Again, it could be fundamental alteration of the extent and scope of license if geography again is proving to be far too unwieldy for the particular licensee. So it's really interesting, and it shouldn't be considered in isolation either. It should be considered with a slightly forward look in the sense that improvements, whether in the hands of the licensor or the licensee, how they get dealt with. Do they become part of the same license, or are they material enough to justify a different license and potentially, possibly, a different ownership and licensing position, particularly when it's the licensee that's coming up with the foreground IP, as it were.
Yeah.
Next slide, please. So this gets, I suppose, into something that's always a consideration, and we've touched upon it, Sam and I, previously, when it comes to R&D arrangements or any other form of collaborative arrangement. What happens when you start mixing IP, and how do you ensure that the ownership of that and the appropriate rights are afforded? You also again need to consider, I suppose, to the extent that something's going to arise from it, how that then becomes owned, and if necessary, appropriately cross-licensed. But you normally start from as simple a position as possible, which is what is being contributed. Again, it should be necessary, but nevertheless, it shouldn't be particularly debatable that is someone's background IP, unless of course both parties are contributing some sort of Venn diagram of IP, and there's some common ground. But let's not particularly go down that rabbit warren yet. So again, that normally just requires some quite helpful definitioning, or definitions with possible detail included in agreement-based schedules. You need to, I suppose, consider what is going to happen if, and to the extent that some R&D converts into some foreground IP, but more importantly, commercialization of the resulting package, and what then happens by way of license fees and royalty payments, and who they are payable by to the ultimate background IP owner. But there will need to be forward granting of licenses, because not everything is going to be owned by one party who's dealing with commercializing. And that needs to be reasonably assessed, and hopefully in advance by way of some pretty detailed conversations at heads of terms level. But equally, again, it's not always commercial and commercial, also commercial to commercial based joint ventures. You could have quite considerably, bearing in mind the output of universities, an academic element to it, and from the point of view of what their requirements are in terms of publication, they need to be recognized and acknowledged in the context of commercial requirements. And to the extent that something has got potential patentability, if and to the extent there is going to be a publication, it must be done in consensus and in accordance with and in consultation with all parties, and not to in any way prejudice the possibility of applications being made and subsequent to them. So
so we did touch on that
considered.
with Reese, when it was, if you contract with the university, if a student ends up doing the work, they're not under the same IP legislation, if you like, of who owns what, compared with an employee of the university.
Indeed.
So if you engage with the university, be careful who owns what IP generally, because I've heard of stories, of nightmare stories of students who've then gone on to do talks at international conferences, and all the IP this company thought they had have just disappeared because the student had free reign to go off and do it. Nightmare.
Absolutely. I mean, it may not be completely understood by all parties. I mean, universities have quite great sort of very detailed IP policies, and a lot of what they allow to be created and what they endorse and support in terms of research and development, they will seek to own. But that's not to in any way, that can't physically control a human being from standing up and revealing what he or she shouldn't be. So
we've got a couple of minutes, Ed. So
okay, well, let's go on to the next one then.
That's me. I keep interrupting you. If I left you to it, we'd be done by now, wouldn't we?
The one point I want to make in relation to this is foreground IP, that is, in other words, IP created and generated from a collaboration, is that the proposition of joint ownership is not often, and in my view, hardly ever the right way to go. And the reason for that is that you have this position of, it's called a trap of domestic enjoyment, in so far as it's all well and good that you jointly create something and jointly own it. Each of the joint owners will have the ability to freely use it for its own account. But if to the extent you want to involve a third party arrangement, that will require the consent of the other party. And that may or may not be forthcoming.
Yeah.
Unless you pre-agree in advance what the parameters of third party usage actually are off the back of a joint ownership position. And that again makes agreement, drafting and negotiation very protracted. I would suggest that it's best to determine who is best placed to own and who is best placed to be a licensee, and afford the necessary pragmatic rights to the licensee for what they require going forward, with the necessary rights reservations for the licensor.
Yeah.
And those three considerations in the lower bullet points there are often the key considerations to determine who should acquire ownership, and who should be licensed, and to an extent it may be informed by the background IP position. But equally, the commercialization position, who's best placed to do that, what the nature of the actual entity is, what the market is, what the geography is, and what the field of application should be. And that to an extent, as well as the balancing power or the bargaining power of the parties will be the overriding issues.
Yeah. Cool.
Okay,
right.
Next slide. This is more to the point of how you sort of look to argue and get to people comfortable with the idea that there is a position of owned IP and a suitable license being granted, because actually the upshot should be mutual benefit and appropriate right affording for both parties. It shouldn't be that something is to the detriment of another unnecessarily or unduly onerously. It should be any commercial exploitation, to the extent it's going to be a successful one, must be suitably incentivizing and beneficial.
Yeah.
Okay. Just some headline points to take away, but nothing inconsistent with what
I love that. Don't tread on anybody else's toes.
Well, yes, this is not, there needs to be some sort of recognition, to the extent that some further licenses have already been afforded to other parties, of what has been afforded. You as a licensor can't simply liberally go down the route of affording the same rights to other people, particularly if you've granted them on an exclusive or sole basis previously. But at the same time, you don't want to be over exceeding what you require as a licensee. You will inevitably get some sort of comeback on that from the licensor, and if to the extent you don't, you might have some very angry licensees knocking at your door.
Yeah, it's interesting. A lot of this is like having a prenup, isn't it? You got to ask all those awkward questions, the what ifs, who's going to do what, A, B, and C. But and it's a bit like we said about getting the specification right on the product design piece. Once you've got that right, you can put that nasty conversation behind you, but you're all protected to move forward.
And you're right. And a lot of this actually, when it comes to licensing in, is to make sure that the licensee is comfortable, and that's incumbent on the licensor to do. Admittedly, the licensee is buyer beware and needs to ask the right questions and seek the right level of commitment. But that's what warranties are for, and to extent that's why they're backed up with indemnities and liability provisions. But you need to make sure that what you're getting is original. It's not infringing. It's not involving unseen third-party rights, either rights that have been afforded already by way of licenses that are conflicting, or license IP rights that aren't suitably at the mercy or at the disposal of the licensor or the owner to be able to afford. Again, all of that at a practical level needs to be determined accurately rather than simply relying on the written word. But the written word is obviously contractually the key thing to get in place from a licensee's position.
Ed, amazing. Thank you so much.
Okay.
I always find it a delight chatting with yourself, and on this subject, because I get involved quite a lot of licensing projects. It's always to hear the words from the master himself about what I should be doing. So I hope everybody out there has found it as informative as I have. But I thought that was absolutely terrific. So thank you very much.
Thank you,
what we're going to do now, folks, we're going to be back at 10 to 3. So that's only so that will be fine, and then we can get ourselves going again. So that'll be with iMed with Al Mills. Really looking forward to this one. This is all about regulation in medtech devices and iMed consultancy. So really looking forward to that. We'll see you back here at 10 to 3. So thank you very much, everybody. Cheers now.